This is Black Wrestlers You Should Know, sponsored by Premier Pro Wrestling to celebrate Black History Month, and it is February 22nd, 2023. And you can't talk about black wrestlers or wrestling, pro wrestling in general, without bringing up Abdullah the Butcher. Now, I know there's a bunch of controversy out there, and just hear me out. We'll get to it at the end, okay? Abdullah was born January 11th and raised in Windsor, Ontario, as part of a family of 10 people in a deeply impoverished household. I want you to remember that term, deeply impoverished, okay? The bottom line is, when it comes to selling tickets and being a success and being a major draw in almost every territory in the United States and actual superstardom in Japan, they don't get any hotter than Abdullah the Butcher. He's literally been everywhere and done everything and worked with everyone. Number one, I would never bury Kamala, ever. Talking about the original Kamala. Kamala does bring up some great points in some of the podcasts that he's done, and the biggest point was that Abdullah supposedly was trying to keep black wrestlers out of Japan at the time. Now I'm going to take you back to that word, impoverished. You know, he was broke. He came up broke, and the man obviously remembered what that was like. I'm not excusing the behavior. If in fact that's what happened, he was wrong. I'm just putting it out there as to why. When we make a mistake, when we F up, does that make us unforgivable, unredeemable? And if I look at the industry as a whole, without personally knowing Abdul the Butcher, he's somebody to look up to. He's a forefather, especially for black wrestlers, you know. Now, the crazy part of this whole thing is, and this is something when I used to have a blog, it was the Pile Driver. I was getting 1,000 unique visits per day, and the thing that I hated the most was this Hannibal, this Devin, whatever the hell, from Canada. When he tried to, or when he did actually sue Abdul the Butcher in Canada, and I think what he sued him for, he actually ended up winning with some sort of goofy lawsuit, claiming that he was cut by Abdullah the Butcher, so because they exchanged blood, Abdullah the Butcher inadvertently gave him hepatitis C. Number one, you can't prove where you got hepatitis C. You can't prove it. Most of the cases of hepatitis, truth be known, are ingesting food that was prepared or handled by somebody with hepatitis. The other thing is Hannibal, or the Hannibal, or whatever he calls himself, is a moron. When this came out back in the day, I tagged the shit out of him and I tagged the shit out of his then attorney to talk about the background of the Hannibal. He really wanted to be in this wrestling industry. He must have some really wealthy parents because he kind of tried to buy his way into the industry. I'm not going to bring up names and Barry who and whoever, the messengers, but one thing I do know is that Hannibal was considered not usable in Puerto Rico because he was, quote, end quote, gay for the blade. Puerto Rico was built on blood, the reputation, but not in the opening contests and not in every match. So Hannibal would go out there and wrestle and gig himself in the first or second match when he got booked, and I don't think he was even being paid without anyone asking him to. He's gay for the blade. You see what I'm saying? I hadn't heard that term before. I kind of knew what it meant, but I wanted to know what the definition was because I've never heard of a mark in the history of wrestling up till that point that would be so hard up to do something like that. Now, if you look at the lawsuit was supposedly gone his favor. The only reason it went in his favor was because Abdullah the Butcher didn't even show up. So of course he won. It was uncontested. But it's ridiculous. It's a joke. Even with my little bit of experience with law, I could have beat that case for Hannibal, defending him as a non-attorney. That's how ridiculous it was. I mean, Abdullah. The guy's an idiot. And let's look and see what happened with him. Hannibal was charged with, I think, some sort of battery on a woman. And then that idiot paid somebody in Texas to book him and his girlfriend to come in and get the wrestling tapes for the only place that would book him is to buy his way into it. And he went ahead and took liberties with some poor bastard referee. And look it up. Look it up. You'll see what I'm talking about. He did exactly what this case, this lawsuit supposedly had that he won with Abdullah the Butcher. I saw the match where this supposedly happened, and this Hannibal is a goof. He runs the town that he lives in or the area that he's from, and he's a mark. He went ahead and booked himself against Abdullah in a cage. Premier Pro Wrestling doesn't use a cage. Do you want to know why we don't use a cage? Because if you use a cage, you have to have blood. That's what I'm talking about. The idiot knew what he was doing, and the rest is all made up. He was so hard up to mean anything in this industry, but he goes out there and actually breaks the laws, gets convicted. It's a crazy thing where he was released on bail for his last escapade. This is a 40-something-year-old guy, and he's released to the custody of his parents. And there's also some other stuff in there where he did a TNA show. And TNA at the time, and I was there when they booked it, was so hard up to go to Canada. They went and worked with him without getting any advance payments first. The first night was Hannibal's hometown. It broke even. The next night lost so much money, Hannibal technically owed TNA Impact $60,000. And he went through all this for no money whatsoever. He just wanted to get booked so he could say, I worked for TNA Impact. So there you go with Hannibal. But the problem with Hannibal is he paid all these names that needed the money to go ahead and do his podcast. If you've ever heard that joke, the kid was so unpopular they had to tie a stake around his neck so the dog would play with him. That's this Devin Nicholson or Nichols or whatever Hannibal's real name is in Canada. He's an idiot. Cornette goes off on him. If you guys are into it, just Google Jim Cornette and Hannibal, and there's just never ending material. And Jim does it a lot better than I do. So back to Abdullah the Butcher. The fact of the matter is, he was a pioneer for the black wrestler, especially in Japan, where a lot of black wrestlers made a lot of money. The other thing Kamala says, the original Kamala says, is that uh, Abdullah was taking a booking fee on booking the black wrestlers there, and then he puts the heat on Kamala. Well, the bottom line to it is that would be on Inoki and or Baba, whichever company he was working for, because they're the ones that approved that. He couldn't have beat up the Japs and taken the 15%. So that might have been customary, and we don't know the entirety of that, the full story there. One thing I do know is that if Kamala had the energy and he was a younger man, he could definitely go after this Nicholson punk for defamation of character, and everybody that Nicholson paid to do his podcast to say shitty things about Abdullah the Butcher. But at the end of the day, I've been in the industry myself for 35 years. I've never heard a bad word about Abdullah the Butcher. He did what was good for business. He protected himself. He's a businessman, and I'm sure he saved his money because I know that to this day he still has two barbecue places, one in the Atlanta area and the other one somewhere in Japan. And at the end of the day, if he was that controversial and these things were true, 100% true, I don't see him being inducted into World Wrestling Entertainment Hall of Fame while the company was being publicly traded. Everything on the internet and on the internet wrestling sites is the innovator of fake news. So I guess what I'm saying is if Abdullah the Butcher was all these things that they say he is or was, it would definitely have hurt the stock price. So there you go. That's as far as the truth goes. Again, I know a lot of old timers, and all the old timers just say the bottom line to it is Abdullah knew how to get himself over and he knew how to draw money. The other part of it is that is the trickle down effect in what used to be the industry. The way they used to pay was 33% to talent, 33 and a third percent for promotion in the venue, 33 and a third percent to the boys. And then you'd get more money based on where you were in the card. And it's actually still that way with WWE as far as incentives go. So Abdullah the Butcher was good for business because a lot of people would make money when he was in hot angles where he drew. Also in Puerto Rico, you have to think about the fact that he earned himself a percentage of the bookings down there, the events down there that he was on. You know, if he was such an asshole, why didn't Brody beat the shit out of him? Because you never hear anyone say anything bad about Brody, and everybody talks about Brody's integrity, and I'm talking about King Kong Brody, Bruiser Brody. Why did Brody prefer to work with Abdullah if these other hearsay punks, and they're not wrestlers? Devin Nicholson is no wrestler. He never was a wrestler. He tried to buy his way in, and it didn't work. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that based upon the 35 years of guys that I know and all the veterans, Abby's name always came up. I've never heard anybody bury him. And let's look at the facts and the figures, the numbers, the gates. And then I'm going to ask you to refer back to if the man had issues. Most people that do come from impoverished childhoods do have issues when it comes to money, you know? All right, guys, I hope you guys are enjoying these. It's again, it's February 22nd. This is sponsored by Premier Pro Wrestling, so there are no ads or YouTube commercials on here. Please bear that in mind and support Premier Pro Wrestling on Pro Wrestling Tees. Stream unbelievable amount of content. I'm going to go ahead and say the most wrestling content, Premier Pro Wrestling on Patreon. And please like and subscribe.